The entrance hall of the Whitmore estate was not designed for comfort. It was designed to remind you where you stood. 30-foot ceilings, Italian marble imported in 1924, chandeliers that had once hung in a French chateau before the war. The kind of space that swallowed sound and replaced it with reverence. Today, it swallowed something else. Grief. Or at least, the performance of it. Outside, a procession of black town cars stretched down the tree-lined driveway like a funeral parade for a head of state. Drivers in crisp suits opened doors for men in bespoke charcoal and women wrapped in silk and pearls. No one arrived alone. No one arrived unnoticed. This was not a funeral. This was a gathering of empires. And she had been standing at the side entrance for 11 minutes. Her name, though no one had asked, was Elise Cartwright. She wore a simple black dress, wool, not silk, elegant but understated. Her hair was pulled back into a low bun. No jewelry except a pair of small silver earrings. She carried a black leather portfolio under one arm. She did not look out of place because she was underdressed. She looked out of place because she was unaccompanied, and because she was black. The first usher, a young man with slicked hair and a Bluetooth earpiece, glanced at her twice before approaching. "Excuse me, miss, are you with the catering staff?" Elise met his eyes. Her expression did not change. No. A pause. He blinked, recalibrating. "Are you a guest?" "I was invited." Another pause, longer this time. He glanced at his tablet, scrolling quickly. His finger hovered. She could see him searching for a name he didn't recognize, a +1 that didn't add up. "Your name?" "Elise Cartwright." He scrolled again, slower now, his brow furrowed. "I don't see you on the—" "Check the executors list." His fingers stopped. He looked up sharply. But before he could respond, an older woman in a navy dress and a pearl choker appeared beside him. Her tone was curt, efficient. "Timothy, we're running behind. Seat her quickly." The young man nodded, flustered. "Of course, Mrs. Halpern." He gestured toward the main hall. "This way." The interior of the estate chapel was breathtaking. Stained glass windows filtered the morning light into deep blues and golds. Rows of polished mahogany pews stretched toward an altar draped in white lilies. A grand piano sat silent in the corner. The air smelled faintly of lilac and old wood, and every seat near the front was filled. Senators, CEOs, federal judges, Ivy League presidents, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, 2 former cabinet members. The kind of people whose names appeared in history books, not gossip columns. Elise followed the usher down the center aisle. She noticed the glances, some fleeting, some prolonged. A woman in a fur stole leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind her gloved hand. A silver-haired man in the third row frowned slightly, his gaze trailing her as she passed. No one smiled. No one nodded. She was a disruption in a carefully curated equation. The usher stopped abruptly. Not at the front, not even in the middle, at the back. The very last row. He gestured vaguely toward the corner seat, near the side door. The kind of seat reserved for latecomers. Or staff who needed to slip out early. "Here will be fine," he said quickly. Elise looked at the seat, then at the rows ahead, then at him. She said nothing. She sat. The usher disappeared without another word. From her position, Elise could see everything. The black draped casket at the front, surrounded by orchids and roses. The enormous portrait of the deceased, Julian Whitmore, displayed on a gilt easel. His face stern, intelligent, unsmiling. A man who had built railroads, reshaped banking regulations, and funded entire university wings. And she could see them. The mourners. Row 1, Julian's distant relatives. A nephew who ran a hedge fund. A grandniece who sat on 3 nonprofit boards. They wore grief like tailored suits, fitted, but not quite natural. Row 2. The business elite. Men who controlled logistics empires and media conglomerates. They checked their phones discreetly beneath their programs. Row 3. The politicians. A governor, 2 senators, a former ambassador. They sat stiffly, aware they were being watched, even here. And in the front row, center seat, sat a woman in her 60s with a diamond brooch the size of a walnut. Victoria Langford, Julian's oldest friend, chair of the Whitmore Foundation, the person everyone assumed would deliver the eulogy. She had not looked back once. Elise opened her portfolio. Inside were documents, neatly organized, tabbed, highlighted. She did not read them. She had memorized every word months ago. Instead, she watched. The service began with a string quartet. Soft, mournful, perfectly timed. Then a pastor took the podium. He spoke in broad, reverent terms. A titan of industry, a visionary, a man who understood legacy. No one cried. A board member approached next. He shared an anecdote about Julian's negotiation style. It was polished, rehearsed. The crowd chuckled politely. Then Victoria Langford rose. The room stilled. She walked to the podium with the kind of authority that comes from decades of deference. Her voice was steady, commanding. Julian Whitmore was many things, she began, but above all, he was deliberate. Heads nodded. He believed in structure, in order, in the preservation of what mattered. More nods. And he entrusted those of us who understood that responsibility to carry forward his vision. Her gaze swept the room. It did not reach the back row. Today we honor not just a man, but a legacy. One that will endure because we will ensure it. Restrained, but genuine. Victoria returned to her seat, her expression serene. She believed every word she had said. Elise remained still. Her hands rested lightly on the closed portfolio. She did not clap. She simply waited. Because she knew something Victoria did not. Something no one in that room knew. Julian Whitmore had made one final decision, and he had made it 6 months ago, in a lawyer's office, with only 2 witnesses, and a woman named Elise Cartwright. The chapel had begun to feel smaller. Not physically. The ceilings were still vaulted, the space still grand, but the air had thickened. Anticipation, or perhaps discomfort, had settled over the room like humidity before a storm. Elise could feel it. The way people shifted in their seats, the murmured conversations that resumed too quickly after each eulogy, the glances toward the front, toward Victoria, toward the casket. They were waiting for something. Closure, perhaps, or confirmation. Confirmation that the world they knew, the hierarchies, the access, the influence, would continue undisturbed. Another speaker took the podium. Charles Drummond, a federal appellate judge. Julian had funded his first campaign for district attorney 30 years ago. He spoke about justice, about Julian's quiet support of judicial reform, about integrity. Elise watched him closely. She had read his name in the files. He was one of 7 board members who had voted to defund the Whitmore Scholarship Program last year. Too many recipients, they argued, were from non-traditional backgrounds. The decision had been reversed, by Julian, personally. Drummond finished his remarks, to polite applause, and returned to his seat beside a woman in a charcoal suit. She whispered something to him. He nodded, his expression neutral. Elise made a mental note. Row 4 held someone unexpected, a younger man, early 40s, expensive suit but rumpled. He sat slightly apart from the others, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the casket. Elise recognized him, Marcus Whitmore, Julian's estranged son. She knew the story. Marcus had left the family business 2 decades ago, started a tech nonprofit focused on digital literacy in underserved communities. Julian had publicly called it a waste of potential. They had not spoken in 15 years. And yet, Marcus was here. Not in the front row, not with the family, but present. Elise watched as he glanced toward Victoria. His expression was unreadable, but his hands, gripping the program, were white-knuckled. The eulogies continued. A university president, a museum director, a philanthropist who had co-chaired 3 galas with Julian. Each speech was articulate, gracious, emotionally controlled, and each one painted the same portrait. Julian Whitmore, the builder, the strategist, the guardian of tradition. Not a single speaker mentioned his early life. Not one referenced the scholarship he had received as the son of a railroad worker. The years he spent as the only person in boardrooms who hadn't inherited his seat. They had rewritten him, polished him into something easier to memorize. Elise had seen the original drafts of his memoir, the chapters he never published, the reflections on class, on access, on the violence of being underestimated. She had also seen the letter he wrote explaining why he burned them. "They would not forgive me for remembering," it read. At the 23-minute mark, the pastor returned to the podium. "We will now observe a moment of silence," he said softly. The room obeyed. 200 people, perfectly still. Elise closed her eyes, not in prayer, in preparation. She had met Julian Whitmore 4 years ago, not at a gala, not at a fundraiser, at a legal aid clinic in Baltimore. Elise had been working as a public interest attorney, representing tenants facing eviction from a property owned by a shell company. The case was small, unremarkable, the kind that rarely made it to trial. But the shell company's largest investor was a Whitmore subsidiary. Julian had appeared, unannounced, at a settlement meeting. The landlord's lawyers had been stunned. Elise had not. She had simply presented her case, calmly, thoroughly, without deference. Julian had listened. Then he had overruled his own legal team and offered a settlement that exceeded her client's demands. Afterward, he had asked her to lunch. She had declined. He had asked again. She had accepted. They met quarterly after that, always in quiet places, never photographed, never publicized. He asked her questions about law, about systems, about people who built power without inheritance. She answered honestly. He told her stories about boardrooms where he was the only one who had ever filed his own taxes, about charities that raised millions but changed nothing, about the loneliness of being believed only after you no longer needed belief. He never called her a friend, but he trusted her. And 6 months ago, he had asked her a question. "If you could dismantle something I built and make it better, what would you do?" She had not hesitated. "Everything." He had smiled. "Good." The moment of silence ended. The pastor stepped aside, and an older man in wire-rimmed glasses approached the podium. Harrison Greaves, Julian's attorney for 40 years. The room straightened. This was the moment they had been waiting for. He did not smile. Julian Whitmore left very specific instructions regarding the reading of his will, he began. He requested that it be read in full, in the presence of all attendees, immediately following this service. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria's head turned slightly. Her expression remained composed, but her fingers tightened around her program. Greaves continued. "This is highly unusual, but it was his explicit wish, and as his legal representative, I am bound to honor it." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick document, bound, sealed, notarized. He broke the seal. The sound echoed. Elise did not move, but her pulse quickened, not from anxiety, from certainty. Greaves cleared his throat. The last will and testament of Julian Edward Whitmore. Executed on the 14th of July, in the presence of 2 witnesses and duly notarized in the state of New York. He began to read. The opening clauses were standard. Declarations of soundness of mind, revocations of prior wills. Then came the bequests, small ones first. To his housekeeper, $50,000 and continued housing for life. To his driver, $75,000 and a pension. To Marcus, a handwritten letter and a single share of Whitmore Industries stock. He did not look up. Greaves continued. To the members of the Whitmore Foundation Board of Directors. Victoria leaned forward. I leave my gratitude for your years of service. A pause, and nothing further. The room froze. Someone coughed. Victoria's face remained still, but color rose slowly into her cheeks. Greaves turned the page. The entirety of my estate, including all properties, financial holdings, trusts, and controlling interest in Whitmore Industries and the Whitmore Foundation, every eye was on him, is to be placed under the executive control of Elise Margot Cartwright. Silence. Absolute. Suffocating. And then, slowly, heads began to turn. Toward the back of the room. Toward the last row. Toward her. Elise did not smile. She did not smile. She simply met their eyes, one by one. Harrison Greaves did not pause for the shock. He continued reading, his voice steady, professional, as if he were reciting quarterly earnings, not detonating the social order of everyone present. Elise Margot Cartwright is hereby appointed as the sole executor of this estate, with full legal authority to distribute, dissolve, restructure, or maintain any and all assets as she sees fit. A woman in the third row inhaled sharply. Victoria Langford remained perfectly still, but her knuckles, pressed against the armrest, had gone white. Greaves turned another page. Furthermore, Ms. Cartwright is granted irrevocable controlling interest in Whitmore Industries, the Whitmore Foundation, and all associated subsidiary entities. Someone stood. A man in the fifth row, silver hair, burgundy tie. Elise recognized him. Terence Ashford, board member, venture capitalist. He had once described Julian's philanthropy as an expensive hobby. "This is absurd," he said. His voice carried. "Who the hell is Elise Cartwright?" Greaves looked up from the document. His expression did not change. "She is the executor of this will, Mr. Ashford, and unless you intend to challenge the mental competency of a man you eulogized 20 minutes ago, I suggest you sit down." Ashford's jaw worked, but he sat. Elise remained in her seat. She had anticipated this moment, rehearsed her composure, but she had not anticipated the weight of it. 200 pairs of eyes, some confused, some furious, some calculating, all of them trying to place her, to locate her in their mental maps of influence and connection, and finding nothing. She was a blank space, and that terrified them more than anything. Greaves continued. In addition to executive control, Ms. Cartwright is designated as the primary beneficiary of the following: the Whitmore Estate in Bedford, New York, the Whitmore Residence in Georgetown, the Alpine property in Scotland. All liquid assets held in trust, totaling approximately $470 million. The number hung in the air. A woman near the front whispered to her husband. He shook his head, his face ashen. Greaves turned another page. Ms. Cartwright is also granted sole discretion over the continuation or dissolution of all current foundation programs, board appointments, and institutional partnerships. Victoria finally moved. She turned in her seat. Her eyes found Elise. And for the first time, Elise saw something crack in that perfect, controlled expression. Not anger. Fear. Greaves cleared his throat. Julian Whitmore included the following personal statement, to be read aloud at this time. He adjusted his glasses and began. To those gathered here, if you are hearing this, I am gone, and if you are shocked, then you are not paying attention. I built an empire on the assumption that I would be underestimated. That my background, my lack of pedigree, my refusal to perform deference would disqualify me. It did not. Because I understood something that many of you have forgotten. Power is not inherited. Carefully, quietly, and with precision. I have spent 50 years watching people like you mistake proximity for partnership. You stood beside me at galas. You toasted my health. You sought my endorsements. But you never asked why I gave them. You believed I was preserving a legacy. I was not. I was buying time. Time to find someone who understood what I built and why it needed to be dismantled. The room had gone silent again. But this was different. This was the silence of dawning comprehension. Greaves continued. Elise Cartwright is not my protégé. She is not my heir in the traditional sense. She is the person I trust to do what I could not. To take everything I built and make it just. Victoria stood abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. "This is a mistake," she said. Her voice was shaking. Julian was ill. He was isolated. Someone manipulated. "Mrs. Cartwright," Greaves said, interrupting, his voice calm and steady. "You said Mr. Cartwright was manipulated. But what if that was not the full story?" Langford. Greaves's voice was ice. "Julian Whitmore executed this will 6 months ago, in the presence of myself and 2 independent witnesses. He was evaluated by 3 separate physicians, all of whom certified his mental competency. This document is legally ironclad." He paused. "If you wish to contest it, you are welcome to spend the next decade in probate court. But I assure you, you will lose." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. She sat down slowly. Greaves resumed reading. "To the members of the board who sought to narrow the scholarship program, your terms are terminated, effective immediately. To those who argue that the foundation should prioritize traditional partnerships, your recommendations are noted and disregarded. To those who whispered that my investments in public education, criminal justice reform, and equitable housing were political, you were right. They were, and they will continue." A man in the second row stood and walked out, then another. 3 more followed. The heavy doors closed behind them, with dull, resonant thuds. No one else moved. Greaves folded the letter. "That concludes Julian Whitmore's personal statement. The remainder of the will details financial structures, fiduciary responsibilities, and legal contingencies. Copies will be made available to all relevant parties within 48 hours." He looked up. "Miss Cartwright, if you would join me at the front." This was the moment. Elise stood. She did not hurry. She walked down the center aisle with the same measured pace she had used entering. But this time, the silence was different. It was not dismissal. It was witness. Every face turned toward her, some with disbelief, some with barely concealed rage, some, like Marcus Whitmore, with something that looked almost like hope. She reached the front. Greaves extended his hand. She shook it. Then he handed her a sealed envelope. "Julian asked that you read this privately," he said quietly. She nodded. She turned to face the room. 200 people. The architects of policy, the gatekeepers of capital, the curators of culture, all waiting. She did not smile. She did not offer reassurance. She simply spoke. "And, for those of you wondering, I am not here to continue Julian Whitmore's legacy." A pause. "I am here to complete it." She let the words settle. "You will receive formal correspondence within the week, outlining structural changes to the foundation, the board, and all associated entities. I expect full cooperation and full transparency." She glanced toward Victoria. "If you have concerns, you may direct them to Mr. Greaves. If you have objections, You may direct them to your attorneys." Her voice remained calm, even. But understand this, Julian Whitmore did not leave his estate to someone who would be managed, or advised, or controlled. She paused. He left it to someone who would act. And with that, she turned, and walked toward the side exit. Not the grand doors, not the main entrance where the photographers and town cars waited. The side exit, where she had entered, alone. Behind her, the room erupted, voices overlapping, chairs scraping, phones being pulled from pockets. But Elise did not look back. She pushed open the door, stepped into the sunlight, and disappeared. The days that followed were not marked by spectacle. There were no press conferences, no televised statements, no viral confrontations. Elise Cartwright did not perform her authority. She exercised it. Within 72 hours, the Whitmore Foundation's board received formal notice. Every current member was offered the opportunity to reapply for their position. Not one accepted. By the end of the week, Victoria Langford had resigned from 6 nonprofit boards. She released a brief statement, citing personal reasons and a desire to focus on family. She did not mention Julian's name. Terrence Ashford attempted to leverage his network. He called in favors. He pressured mutual contacts. He was informed, politely, that those contacts now reported to Elise. He withdrew quietly. The media tried to build a narrative. Mystery woman inherits billionaire's fortune. Who is Elise Cartwright? The heiress no one saw coming. Elise gave no interviews. Her lawyer released a single statement on her behalf. Ms. Cartwright intends to honor Julian Whitmore's vision by expanding access, accountability, and equity across all entities under her stewardship. Further details will be made available as structural transitions are completed. It was brief, and it told them nothing, which was exactly the point. The scholarship program was reinstated, then doubled, then expanded to include formerly incarcerated individuals, undocumented students, and those aging out of foster care. Applications opened within 2 weeks. 12,000 people applied in the first 48 hours. The foundation's investment portfolio was restructured. Fossil fuel holdings divested. Private prison partnerships terminated. Predatory loan servicers severed. The financial press called it reckless. The foundation's returns increased by 11% in the first quarter. Marcus Whitmore received his letter 3 weeks after the funeral. It was handwritten, in his father's precise, angular script. He read it standing in his kitchen, alone. First time in 15 years, he cried. The letter did not apologize. Julian Whitmore was not a man who apologized. But it acknowledged. It acknowledged that Marcus had been right. That walking away had taken more courage than staying. That building something new, something without legacy or approval, was the only thing that mattered. The final line read, "You were the son I needed, not the one I deserved. I hope you can forgive the difference." Marcus folded the letter carefully and called Elise. They met the following week and began planning the Whitmore Center for Restorative Innovation together. Elise did not move into the Bedford estate. She kept her apartment in Baltimore. She traveled when necessary. She attended meetings. She signed documents. But she did not perform wealth. She wielded it. There was a difference, and everyone who worked with her understood it within minutes. She was not impressed by pedigree, or titles, or decades of institutional inertia. She asked 2 questions in every meeting. Who does this serve? And who does this exclude? If the answers were unsatisfactory, the program was revised, or ended. 6 months after the will was read, a journalist finally tracked her down. He found her at a community law clinic in Detroit. She was reviewing tenant contracts. He asked for an interview. She declined. He asked if she had any comment on the criticism, the people who called her unqualified. the whispers that she had manipulated a dying man. She looked up from the contract. Her expression was calm. "I was underestimated my entire life," she said. So was Julian. The difference is, he had 50 years to prove himself. I have the rest of my life. She returned to her work. The journalist left. He did not publish the story. There was nothing sensational to report. Just competence, and purpose, and quiet, unshakable power. On the 1-year anniversary of Julian Whitmore's death, Elise stood alone in his study. The room had been preserved exactly as he had left it. Books, papers, a half-finished glass of scotch on the desk. She opened the envelope Harrison Greaves had given her, the one Julian had asked her to read privately. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten, in his unmistakable script. It read, "They will remember me for what I built. Let them remember you for what you burned." Elise smiled, folded the letter, and placed it in her pocket. Then she turned off the light, locked the door, and went back to work. Because this was never about Julian Whitmore. It was never about his empire, or his legacy. It was about a question he had spent 50 years trying to answer. What happens when the people who were never supposed to inherit power do? Elise Cartwright was the answer, not because she was chosen, but because she was ready. And in a world built on assumptions, on proximity, on the quiet violence of being overlooked, they tried to seat her in the back row. They tried to make her invisible. They tried to decide her value before she ever opened her mouth. They were wrong. Not because she fought them, but because she didn't need to. She simply waited. And when the moment came, she was exactly where she needed to be. Watching, listening, ready. Because power is not loud. It does not announce itself. It does not beg for recognition. It simply is. And the people who underestimate it, they learn, eventually.